And thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. Glad to have you with us. Lots of news going on. Here's your pop quiz. North Korea. North Korea has borders with 3 other countries. What are the 3 other countries? I will spot you the first 2. Obviously, North Korea has a border with South Korea, one of the most famous borders on Earth. It features a real live DMZ. It's one of the most fraught conflict lines on the planet, and it has been for decades. So that's one of the 2 I will spot you. Obviously, North Korea borders South Korea. North Korea also borders China. The North Korean border with China is way longer than its border with South Korea. The length of that border, the 23 different road crossings across that North Korea-China border, all those things make China acutely interested in North Korean affairs, not just as a friendly neighbor, but also because China quite desperately doesn't want North Korea to suffer some sort of catastrophic collapse. North Korea falling apart, war in North Korea, an unimaginable uprising of the people in North Korea, anything that might cause the collapse of that weird, isolated, repressed, poor place, that would produce potentially millions of North Korean refugees, which China believes would become their instant problem and one they do not want. So that worry, that balancing act with North Korea over that big, long, porous border they've got with North Korea, I think that explains a lot of China's attitude toward them, particularly as China's economic rise has created such an increasing contrast between living standards in China and what people have to endure in North Korea. So they're very conscious of that border. It's a big, important international geopolitical thing. So that's 2 of the 3, right? North Korea borders South Korea, North Korea borders China. What is the 3rd country with which North Korea has a border? It's right up there on the sea coast in the northeastern corner of North Korea, where the Tumen River filters into a muddy delta and reaches the sea. It's up there in the far north. It's a wicked cold, wicked isolated, gray little corner of the world. North Korea has a tiny little sniglet of a border with a 3rd country there. There's only one crossing over that border. It's a bridge. It is a bridge you cannot walk across, nor can you drive across it. You can only take a train across it. It's the one crossing on that border between North Korea and that 3rd country. If you take that train, which doesn't come very often, if you take that train across that bridge from North Korea and they let you cross that border, where you end up in is Russia. That's the 3rd country that borders North Korea. In 1860, Russia came in and annexed that little spit of land at the delta of the Tumen River. Previously, that territory had been China, but Russia came in while we were busy starting our own civil war in 1860, and they pushed the Chinese border back 11 miles inland. And that had one very important consequence for China. It cut off China's access to the sea anywhere north of the Korean Peninsula. And Russia, in taking that piece of land, they also bought themselves a weird little 11-mile long border between Russia and the other weirdest country on Earth. Technically, North Korea is a communist country, one of the last few communist countries on Earth. When the Soviet Union still existed, the USSR was the main outside entity that was propping up North Korea more than any other ally or any other benefactor. One of the great humanitarian catastrophes of the 20th century happened very late in the 20th century. It happened in the 1990s in North Korea, when widespread, sustained famine in that country is estimated to have killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the 90s. That famine and its astounding death toll were sort of hard for the rest of the world to see because North Korea is such a closed and secretive and isolated country, but that famine didn't happen in isolation. Part of the reason that famine is believed to have happened and happened then is because of the collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. They really had been North Korea's main lifeline in terms of economic support. When the Soviet Union collapsed at the start of the 90s, so did North Korea's ability to feed its population. Its patron went into chaos. North Korea started to starve to death. Well, now, of course, it's China that is the ascendant economic superpower in that region and in the world. And now it is China that is keeping North Korea alive economically, accounting for more than 90% of North Korea's trade. But it's both China and Russia who both have a big stake in that country. China and Russia both are literally neighbors with North Korea. They're abutters, even if Russia's North Korea border just has that one train bridge and a bunch of miserable guards and nothing else. When President Trump met with Kim Jong Un last night, it was easy to be caught up in the strange spectacle of that meeting. When things happen that have never happened before, when things happen for which there's no parallel in American history, it can be hard to sort of get your bearings in terms of what you ought to expect and what should be seen as a shocking departure from what you expected. It can be hard to see what would count as a good outcome versus a bad outcome when something has never happened before and nothing like it has ever happened before. And the thing about unprecedented events is that they exist in a category of their own. You have nothing to stack up next to them to try to keep perspective, to know when something is right or when something is definitely off. But even with those caveats about last night, I think it is safe to say that there is one thing, one very big thing, that was definitely off about that meeting last night. And that is the baseline reality that we don't know what it was for. Why did that happen? What was that for? No U.S. president has ever agreed to meet with a North Korean dictator before. They have sought this for decades. Kim Jong Un has wanted this for years. His father wanted it before him. His grandfather wanted it before him. All U.S. presidents have been asked. All U.S. presidents has considered it, at least to a certain degree. None of them have said yes. Why did this U.S. president agree to this meeting? Why give North Korea a one-on-one, in-person summit with the American president with all this pageantry and all the honorifics? After every other president said no, why did this president say yes? What was it for? I mean, North Korea made no new promises in order to get this summit, no new promises about their weapons program or their own behavior toward their own people or anything else. The North Korean dictator did reassert what has been a long-time vague assurance from the North Korean government that they seek to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. But you know what? North Korean dictators have been saying that to the United States in the context of various agreements and negotiations for more than 25 years now. That's nothing new. They started pledging that they would denuclearize the Korean Peninsula in the early 90s. Since then, they have dropped out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They've mastered and completed multiple nuclear fuel cycles. They've successfully developed operational nuclear weapons. They've manufactured what are believed to be dozens of operational nuclear bombs. They've advanced their missile program so that they have reliable short, medium, and long-range missiles that they could use to fire those nuclear weapons as far away as Chicago if they so desire. And they got themselves even a hydrogen bomb as of 2017. That's what they've done since they first started promising in the early 90s that they'd be happy to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. That's their vision of a denuclearized Korean Peninsula and their role in it. Them having dozens of nuclear weapons and vehicles to deliver them all over the globe. That's what they mean by, we want to denuclearize. So, in order to get this summit last night with the American president, the North Korean dictator and the North Korean government appear to have not promised change of any kind in their nuclear program or in any other policy. Literally, they gave up nothing. They promised nothing. In exchange for that generous offer, President Trump gave North Korea this royal wedding-style summit in which North Korea was billed as a nation equal in stature to the United States, and the North Korean dictator was billed as an international leader equal in stature to the President of the United States. As a bonus, the president also threw in literally hours of unwavering, over-the-top praise for the North Korean dictator and his repeated insistence that it was his honor as President of the United States to have the opportunity to meet with the dictator. And then, surprise, President Trump announced, when it was all over, that he would end the joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea. What? South Korea is supposed to be one of our closest allies, but apparently they had no idea this was coming. Quote, South Korea appears to have been blindsided by Trump's change of heart on war games. U.S. officials could not confirm that Trump had told counterparts in Seoul about the plan to suspend military exercises. South Korea soon put out a statement saying they were trying to figure out the exact meaning and intentions in President Trump's comments, because they had no idea this announcement was coming. In addition to blindsiding South Korea about ending joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korean militaries, President Trump also appears to have blindsided the U.S. military with his announcement. Quote, the United States military in South Korea was also apparently blindsided by Mr. Trump's remarks. U.S. Forces Korea said they had received, quote, no updated guidance on execution or cessation of training exercises. So, big picture, what was this summit all about? They have the summit, right? They have the one-on-one meeting, and then they have the extended bilateral meeting with other aides, and then they put out the written statement. The written statement doesn't say anything about ending military exercises. But after all that happens, the president sort of casually announces, after the wedding was over, that at some point during the festivities, he had told them that he'd be calling off U.S. and South Korean joint military exercises. We've been doing those every year since the 1950s. U.S. Forces Korea, the U.S. military in Korea, had absolutely no idea this was coming. And that turns out not to just be strange, it's materially consequential, because right now, U.S. Forces Korea are in the midst of preparing for their next big round of military exercises with South Korea, the ones they do every year. If you look at the longer statement that U.S. Forces Korea put out in response to the president's remarks, it seemed to indicate that maybe the Defense Department, maybe the U.S. military, might even be planning on going ahead with those next exercises with South Korea, because they're not sure if Trump actually meant what he so casually mentioned after this summit was over. What the U.S. Forces Korea statement said was, quote, we have received no updated guidance on execution or cessation of training exercises to include this fall's scheduled Ulchi Freedom Guardian. In coordination with our Republic of Korea partners, we will continue with our current military posture until we receive updated guidance from the Department of Defense. Ulchi Freedom Guardian is a very large joint military exercise that's scheduled to start in late August. I think it's like 11 days long. It's one of the biggest military exercises on Earth. Tens of thousands of South Korean troops, nearly 20,000 U.S. troops. Apparently, the Defense Department is going to proceed as if they're still doing that, because they haven't received any official word. And maybe this is like Trump announcing he wants Hillary Clinton investigated, or like, maybe I'm going to pardon Martha Stewart. Like, they have to wonder if this is just a thought he's had and it's not something he's going to follow through on, and so it's therefore not something they're supposed to follow through on. But if he did mean it, if he is actually ordering an end to these joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea, that is an absolute jackpot for the North Korean dictator. That is one of the things that he wants most on Earth, that he and his father and his grandfather have been trying to get for decades. And now Trump has apparently just given it to them in exchange for nothing. Do you remember last year when North Korea threatened to nuke Guam? Remember, they said they were going to shoot nuclear missiles at Guam. They made this very detailed threat about the 4 nuclear bombs they were going to drop on Guam and how exactly they were going to do that. Remember that? They made that threat to protest last year's Ulchi Freedom Guardian, last year's big joint U.S.-South Korea military exercises in August. Remember before then the flames and ashes threat? Quote, if we push the buttons to annihilate the enemies, even right now, all bases of provocations will be reduced to seas in flames and ashes in a moment. That threat was in protest of U.S.-South Korean military exercises. When they threatened to turn the Sea of Japan into a nuclear sea of fire, that was in protest of U.S.-South Korean military exercises. When they freaking torpedoed a South Korean ship and killed more than 40 South Korean sailors in 2010, that was in response to U.S.-South Korean military exercises. When North Korea announced that they considered themselves to no longer be bound by the ceasefire that ended the Korean War in the 50s, that was in protest of U.S.-South Korean military exercises. For years, for decades, North Korea has not just demanded, they have hysterically demanded and fired missiles and killed people and sunk ships and shelled inhabited South Korean islands to stop these joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises. And now Trump has just given them that for free, for nothing, apparently without talking to anybody else about it, including his own military or the South Koreans or anybody. The U.S. government, the Trump administration insisted that there would be no concessions to North Korea unless they had complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, right? They'd have to do that before the U.S. gave them anything. They didn't give any of that. They didn't even promise to do it. And they got an end to U.S. joint military exercises with South Korea? One of the things they want most in the world that they've been trying to get for decades? Why'd they get that? Why did Trump give that to them? He didn't apparently negotiate it with anybody else, even in the U.S. government or U.S. military. He just himself gave it away. Why did he do that? You know who else wants the U.S. to stop its joint military exercises with South Korea? The abutters. China, naturally, sees itself as the great power in the region and increasingly in the world. They definitely see North Korea as not just a troublesome neighbor, but a neighbor that is squarely within their sphere of exclusive influence. From China's perspective, if they're supposed to be foreign troops circulating in that part of the world, they ought to be Chinese troops and not anybody else's. China, for years, has advocated that the U.S. stop these joint military exercises with South Korea. The other entity that really wants the U.S. to stop its joint military exercises with South Korea, the other country that has been increasingly insistent that those exercises are provocations and they must stop, the country who has been speaking out more and more on that over the last couple of years specifically, is North Korea's other abutter. Here's Russia, March of 2016, expressing their opposition to South Korean U.S. military exercises. Here's Russia again, March of 2017, when those same U.S.-South Korean joint military exercises rolled around again the same time the next year because they're annual exercises. But Russia's starting to get a little more bold in the past year or two in expressing their opposition to the U.S. participating in these joint military exercises. Here's Russia in December 2017 getting even pushier about it, sending the head of the Russian armed forces to the Russian city that is nearest to that little sniglet of North Korean border to personally proclaim his opposition to the U.S. forces, participating in these joint military operations with South Korea. Russia has just this tiny little border, 11-mile-long border with North Korea, with one crossing on a train. And they've got a troubled and varied history over the decades with that country. But Russia is also increasingly straining at its borders right now and shoving back U.S. and Western influence, especially U.S. and Western military presence, anywhere near what it considers to be its own geopolitical interests. And one of the things that they have started to loudly insist on is that the U.S. drop those joint military exercises with South Korea. The U.S. has kept those going as a pillar of U.S. national security strategy for, 70 years now. Until last night, when Trump casually announced that that's over now, he's doing away with those, blindsided everybody involved, and gave North Korea something they desperately want and would do almost anything for, except he gave it to them for free. How come?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.